So imagine you have a nation where international foreign aid has actually successfully raised life expectancy by over a decade.
Right.
Like they've completely revolutionized infant mortality, they've built schools across hundreds of scattered islands, and brought a massive portion of the population into the modern era.
On paper, I mean,
Yeah.
that looks like one of the great public health victories of the last century.
Exactly. But then, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today, you look a little closer at the data you sent us, and you realize that in doing so, they've accidentally triggered a completely new crisis.
Yeah, massive one.
You have a population where nearly 80% of the people are now dying from modern, human-made lifestyle diseases, and the underlying economy is essentially a mirage. So today, we are looking at the ultimate paradox of progress.
It really is just this profound tension. We usually look at development data as this, straight line pointing up and to the right. More money, longer lives, better education.
Right, the classic success story.
But the reality of structural development is incredibly messy. You can fix one massive historical problem like communicable diseases, only to find out you've, well, hollowed out the foundation of the country in a totally different way.
And that messy reality is exactly what we are navigating today.
Yeah.
We've got an incredibly focused session tailored specifically for you, the listener, because I gotta say, you've handed us a truly fascinating, highly structured set of source materials.
Oh, absolutely. The data set you've compiled here is remarkable.
Yeah, we are looking at your academic presentation outline, essentially your master blueprint and slide deck design guide, alongside this massive stack of macroeconomic, demographic, and health data from the World Bank and the UN, all focused on the Federated States of Micronesia, or FSM.
The depth of the time series data you've got here, covering everything from mortality rates to telecommunications, it paints a picture of a nation at a really critical crossroads. You're tracking a country trying to figure out how to survive the 21st century.
So our mission today is to help you perfectly understand the narrative hidden inside this data. We want to make sure you are fully prepped so that when you stand up to deliver this presentation, you know the exact story behind every single number.
Yet the underlying causality.
Exactly. And the overarching theme of your presentation is FSM's structural vulnerability, the daunting challenge of transitioning from aid dependence to sustainable development.
But before we even get into those numbers, I mean, we really have to talk about the visual parameters you've established for this presentation.
Oh, the design guide. I found those guidelines fascinating.
Right, the rules you provided are incredibly strict, and they completely set the tone.
You are demanding a rigorous, uncompromising academic style, pure white or extremely light gray backgrounds. The charts are restricted to deep navy blue and gray-black, using these soft Morandi accent colors.
And you explicitly stated absolutely no bright colors, no 3D graphics, no over-decoration.
At first glance, someone might think, well, that sounds a bit dry. But when you look at the gravity of the data, that austerity makes total sense.
Oh, it's a deeply strategic design choice. You're stripping away all the noise.
You're forcing the audience to look at the raw structural bones of this nation. No flashy graphics to distract them.
Yeah, and just to clarify for anyone who might not know the term, those Morandi accent colors you mentioned, named after the Italian painter Giorgio Morandi, they're these muted, desaturated, earthy tones.
Like a dusty rose or slate gray.
Exactly, sage green, slate gray. By combining a stark white background with heavy navy blues and those muted tones, you are visually communicating seriousness. You aren't selling a product. You are diagnosing a systemic national crisis.
Which brings us perfectly to your executive summary on slide 2. You use this simple 4-grid KPI card key performance indicators to set up a massive cognitive dissonance. It's basically the thesis for your whole presentation.
What's fascinating here is how you frame the paradox right out of the gate.
Yeah, on one hand, FSM has achieved incredible human development milestones. You highlight that female life expectancy has risen to 71 years. That's a huge triumph. But in the very next breath, your data shows the society is standing on an incredibly fragile foundation.
Right, you've got these three other key metrics circling that life expectancy win like warning sirens. First, the service sector makes up a staggering 67.9% of the GDP.
Wow.
Second, 79.4% of deaths are now caused by non-communicable diseases. And third, FSM is completely locked into fossil fuels, with over 93% of electricity reliant on imported oil.
When your audience sees those 4 data points isolated together on that crisp white background, it should make them intensely uncomfortable. I mean, how can a country be living longer yet be so structurally trapped? The math just doesn't seem to add up.
That tension is exactly what drives the rest of your slide deck. To understand how a country can be simultaneously progressing and highly vulnerable, we have to look at the macroeconomy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're moving into the first major section of your outline, slides 3, 4, and 5. You frame this as the mirage of the macroeconomy.
Yeah, mirage is the perfect word for it.
When you put up slide 3, your audience sees this composite line chart showing historical GDP per capita growth. And at a quick glance, the line goes from just over $300 up to $4,166. The immediate assumption in the room is going to be, great, the country is getting richer.
But you aren't letting them walk away with that assumption. Your design guide specifically calls for aggressive visual callouts, these thin, solid arrows pointing to wild volatility along that growth line.
Right, you're directing their eyes to specific years where the growth rate violently swings. We are talking about drops of -10% followed by surges of +30%.
Which is just absolute economic whiplash.
It really is. I mean, if you are a small business owner or a government planner trying to build a 10-year infrastructure project, a 30% spike followed by a 10% contraction, you can't plan a society around that. It's chaos.
It is entirely unsustainable. And the text box you've designed for this slide gives away the punchline for why this is happening. It reads, lack of endogenous growth drivers. Per capita income is highly susceptible to the peripheral economic environment.
Let's unpack endogenous growth for a second. That essentially means growth generated from within, right? Domestic industries, local agriculture, internal innovation.
Correct. It means the wealth is actually being created by the people and the resources inside the country. Because FSM lacks those endogenous drivers, their growth is entirely at the mercy of the outside world.
And to understand why that growth isn't coming from within, we have to look at slide 4, the structural distortion.
Right, the 100% stacked bar chart.
And distortion is putting it mildly. You've got this massive, heavy navy blue block representing the service sector, consistently hovering between 60 and 69% of the total GDP. Meanwhile, you have a downward arrow pointing to industry dropping to a mere 5%.
And agriculture is incredibly weak, too.
Yeah. Wait, in a lot of economic textbooks, a large service sector is like the holy grail of a developed economy. Why is it a warning sign here?
Because of where the money is coming from. If you look at the UK or Singapore, a 70% service sector is driven by high-tech finance, software, global logistics. They're exporting highly valuable services.
But Micronesia doesn't have a massive global investment banking hub.
Exactly. They aren't making physical things because industry is at 5%, and they aren't exporting software. So how are they paying for a service sector that makes up nearly 70% of their economy?
Yeah, what are these services?
That brings us directly to slide 5. This is the key to the entire illusion. You have a scatter and bar chart showing FSM's external vulnerability. The data shows they receive a staggering $1,000 to $1,500+ per capita in net official development assistance ODA annually.
Wait, let me do the math on that. $1,500 per person every single year in foreign aid.
Heavily supported by the United States, yes.
For a family of 4, that's $6,000 a year just magically injected into the economy from the outside. In a country where the per capita GDP is around $4,100, that ODA number is astronomically high.
It's essentially the lifeblood of the entire nation. And understanding how that money moves explains the massive navy blue block on slide 4.
Okay, walk me through it.
That foreign aid flows directly into the national and state governments. The government then uses it to run public services, build clinics, and crucially, pay government salaries.
Ah, I see.
Those government employees who are essentially paid by foreign aid take their paychecks and spend them in the local economy. They buy groceries, eat at restaurants, pay mechanics. In national accounting, retail and government administration are all classified as services.
So the service sector inflates massively, but it's totally artificial.
Completely synthetic. It is a service sector subsidized by international aid, not by the creation of new domestic wealth.
It's like looking at a bodybuilder who has these massive bulging arms. That's the 67.9% service sector. You look at them in a t-shirt and think, wow, they're incredibly strong. But then you realize those arms aren't from lifting weights.
Right, they're from synthetic injections.
Exactly. The ODA is the synthetic injection. And because they haven't been doing the actual heavy lifting of economic development, their legs, agriculture, and industry have completely atrophied. They have 5% legs trying to hold up a 67% upper body.
That analogy captures the fragility perfectly. And it completely explains the violent volatility we saw on slide 3. Because the economy is synthetic, they swing wildly based entirely on external financial shocks.
So if international aid disbursements are delayed or renegotiated, the economy just immediately contracts.
Right. They are completely at the mercy of political decisions made in Washington or at the UN.
So when our listeners presenting this, they need to emphasize this point. When the audience sees that navy blue block, they need to understand it represents vulnerability, not victory.
Definitely. But your audience might ask, if the service sector is a bubble, why not just build factories? Invest that aid money into heavy industry to fix the 5% leg.
And to answer that, we have to look at the physical and demographic reality of FSM on slides 3 and 11. It's not just economics, it's geography.
Yeah, slide 6 introduces a double-line chart tracking population dynamics. And the visual anchor you've designed here is a dark dashed box highlighting that the rural population is still incredibly high, sitting at roughly 77.5 to 77.6%.
In a world obsessed with mass urbanization, seeing almost 80% of a population classified as rural is stunning.
Yeah.
But we have to define rural here, right? We aren't talking about farming villages connected by interstate highways.
Not at all. FSM is an archipelagic nation, over 600 islands scattered across roughly 1 million square miles of the Western Pacific.
Wow.
When the data says 77.5% is rural, it means they are highly dispersed across these remote islands and atolls. And that extreme geographic dispersion is the ultimate bottleneck for traditional industrial development.
That makes total sense. If you want to build a factory, you need a centralized pool of labor. You need deep water ports. You can't build a manufacturing plant if your population is scattered in isolated villages of 200 people across 50 different islands.
The logistics cost of moving materials would bankrupt you before you built a single item. But your source data points to an even more concerning trend. On slide 6, a downward arrow shows the rural population growth rate recently turning negative, around negative 0.45 to negative 0.6%.
So the rural population is actually shrinking. People are leaving.
Yes, it implies outmigration. Because the synthetic service jobs are concentrated in the capital and there's no industry on the outer islands, the working age demographic is leaving.
Let's connect that to the infrastructure data on slide 11. Slide 11 shows the digital divide, and the divergence here is incredibly stark.
You have an upward dashed arrow showing mobile cellular subscriptions rising fast, approaching 29 per 100 people.
Mobile phones are everywhere.
But right below it, a completely flat line showing internet penetration broadband usage lingering stubbornly between 20 and 39.3%. It just hits a ceiling.
I've heard people say mobile tech lets developing nations leapfrog traditional infrastructure. You don't need copper landlines if you have cell towers. So why is this flat broadband line such a red flag?
Because you can't run a modern digital service economy on a spotty mobile connection. A cell tower is great for texting or basic web browsing, but heavy commercial data like running a global remote customer service center or offshore medical billing requires physical fiber optic cables.
Right. And running subsea cables to hundreds of dispersed islands is astronomically expensive.
Exactly. The commercial market refuses to build it, so the internet penetration flatlines.
So if you're a young person in a rural area, you have a smartphone, you can see the opportunities in the globalized world, but because you don't have broadband and no local industry jobs, what do?
You leave.
It's like building a highway system where everyone has a bicycle mobile phones, but no one is allowed to drive a commercial truck broadband. You completely cap their economic potential.
That's a highly effective way to explain it to your audience. The lack of broadband locks them out of a modern digital transition.
While the economic and tech data is sobering, there is one area where FSM has seen an absolute miracle. But as slides 7 and 8 show, even miracles have a dark side. Let's look at the epidemiological U-turn.
This is perhaps the most emotionally resonant part of the data. On slide 7, you use a dual-axis chart to track a monumental public health victory.
The rising trend line shows female life expectancy jumping from 57.6 years in the 1960s to over 71 years today. And then you have a stepping down chart marked with a red circle showing male under 5 mortality plummeting from over 100 deaths per 1,000 live births down to just 20 to 30.
Generations of children who previously would not have survived infancy are growing up. This is the ultimate justification for that foreign aid. It built the clinics and brought in the vaccines.
It's an undeniable success. But then you immediately contrast this on slide 8 with a comparative area chart. A strong box highlights that deaths from communicable diseases like infectious diseases and nutritional issues have dropped to just 12.7%.
Right. They solved the infectious disease problem.
But right next to it, a striking arrow points out that non-communicable diseases, NCDs, heart disease, diabetes, have skyrocketed to cause an overwhelming 79.4% of all deaths. What is happening here?
What your data is capturing is a hyper-accelerated example of the epidemiological transition.
Let's break that down for the listener.
Sure, historically, in developing societies, the leading causes of death are communicable diseases. People die young. When basic healthcare improves, infant mortality drops, and you stop dying from infections.
So you live longer.
Yes. But because you live longer, you live long enough to experience lifestyle diseases, NCDs. But FSM's transition is uniquely dangerous because it's linked to that economic mirage we discussed on slide 4.
Because they have virtually no domestic agriculture.
Exactly. They historically had a labor-intensive traditional diet, local fish, taro, coconuts. But they transitioned to an economy fueled by foreign cash flowing into sedentary government jobs. So what do you do with cash when you don't grow food?
You import it. And you're importing highly processed foods, canned meats, white rice, sugary drinks because fresh produce rots on the shipping docks.
Right, and this massive dietary shift combined with a sedentary lifestyle acts as a shock to their metabolism. You get an absolute epidemic of diabetes and heart disease.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We successfully put out the fire in the kitchen infant mortality, but we didn't realize the water we used was flooding the basement NCDs.
It's an artificial spike driven by their aid-dependent economy.
But how does a fragile economy manage the high cost of chronic disease care? Diabetes means decades of insulin, potentially dialysis.
They struggle immensely. Treating chronic NCDs is exponentially more expensive than vaccine campaigns. A lifetime of renal dialysis is a financial nightmare, especially on an island where machines and specialists are flown in.
It places a massive burden on the already fragile economy.
Exactly. The society is aging, but spending those later years managing expensive diseases.
When you were presenting this, listener, this is the emotional core of the data. Real human lives facing entirely new systemic threats.
And solving complex problems like NCDs and economic diversification requires a highly educated populace. Which leads us to the slides on education, slides 9 and 10.
The human capital paradox, quantity versus quality. On slide 9, you use a funnel chart. At the top, a circled number shows great news. Primary net enrollment is over 95%.
Almost every child is getting into a classroom. That's the ODA money-building schools.
But then the funnel violently narrows. The proportion of the population aged 25 and older who have completed high school is only 60.1%.
Nearly 40% are bleeding out of the system.
Why are they dropping out? To understand that, you look at slide 10, the infographic on teacher-student ratios. The headline looks good, a 19.7 to 1 ratio for primary and junior high.
Less than 20 kids per teacher. Seems perfectly fine.
Right. But the visually highlighted text warns the audience that the percentage of trained or qualified primary teachers fluctuates between a dismal 27% and 39%.
This connects right back to the mirage. The enrollment looks great until you look at teacher quality. Roughly 2/3 of the adults in those classrooms aren't actually qualified to teach.
It's like having a restaurant with plenty of tables and waiters, the 19.7 to 1 ratio, but only a third of the chefs actually know how to cook. It doesn't matter how many waiters you have if the food is inedible. No wonder kids drop out.
That analogy perfectly exposes a flaw in how development aid functions. Foreign aid is great for capital expenditures, building a concrete schoolhouse, but training a teacher is an operational expenditure. It's a decade-long process. Aid models struggle to fund that long-term work.
And you can't transition to a modern, diversified economy if your workforce isn't receiving quality foundational educations. So how do they break out of this? You'd think they'd bring in advanced online learning, right?
But we already established they don't have the broadband for that. And you can't train teachers or run modern schools without reliable electricity. Which brings us to the most literal lock-in of the entire presentation, energy. Slides 12 and 13.
Let's look at slide 12, a stark donut chart showing electricity production. A massive, bolded sector shows fossil fuels imported oil locked in at 93 to 99.8%. The tiny sliver for renewables is just 3.5 to 4.7%.
Over 93% dependent on imported fossil fuels. And slide 13 shows a scattered trend line for carbon intensity. A flat arrow points out that CO2 emission intensity per unit of GDP remains stagnant at roughly 0.6 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per dollar.
Now wait, we have to clarify something for the audience here. This isn't about FSM being a major global polluter.
Oh, absolutely not. This raises an important question. Their absolute emissions are a drop in the ocean.
Right, FSM is not causing global warming.
The flat carbon intensity line represents economic inefficiency. It means they aren't getting better at generating economic value per drop of fuel burned.
Because they rely entirely on imported oil, their whole economy is held hostage by global oil prices.
Exactly. If oil prices spike, the cost of running a school, a hospital to treat those NCDs, or a small business just skyrockets. It's the ultimate bottleneck.
The irony here is just painful. An island nation surrounded by ocean, sun, and wind is 93% dependent on dead dinosaurs shipped in steel barrels from across the world.
It is. Moving to renewables isn't just an environmental goal here. It's a matter of sheer sovereign economic survival.
You cannot build a modern digital economy if your electricity is punishingly expensive. Okay, we've seen the economic distortion, the health crisis, the education bottlenecks, and the energy trap. Is there any hope?
There is. Let's look at the institutional framework on slide 14 and the summary on slide 15.
Slide 14 brightens things up. A radar chart of worldwide governance indicators. A vertical passing line shows FSM actually does quite well globally. Rule of law is at a high 72.6 percentile. Control of corruption is at 70.3.
This is the silver lining. A country cannot execute a dual transition, economic diversification, and energy modernization if its government is corrupt. Because FSM scores well above the median, it proves they have the institutional capacity to absorb investments properly.
They're a reliable partner for international development.
Exactly, provided the money goes to structural changes like renewables and teacher training, rather than just inflating the service sector.
So the mission for FSM isn't about working harder. It's about fundamentally rewiring the machine. They have a good operating system, the governance, but the hardware energy economy is outdated and running on the wrong fuel.
Perfect way to put it. And that leads to slide 15, your conclusion and policy slide, a 3-column infographic.
Column 1 is social capital, with an upward arrow, acknowledging the wins in life expectancy, but warning against the NCD erosion. Column 2 is economic foundation, a horizontal double arrow, the urgent need to pivot away from the aid to services pipeline toward a diversified economy.
And column 3 is infrastructure, a warning triangle. The absolute necessity to shatter the 93% fossil fuel lock-in and invest in broadband and renewables.
And your footer reads, rational policy design based on data is the only way out of island vulnerability. When you put up this final slide, listener, you aren't just summarizing data, you're presenting a blueprint for national survival. The austere navy and white design reflects the serious, sober reality of these numbers.
The way you pull all these threads together, how energy impacts education, which impacts NCDs, which impacts the economy, is masterful.
Thank you so much for helping decode this incredible stack of sources and this strict presentation structure. But before we go, we want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought.
Something that echoes through all the data, the paradox of sovereignty in the 21st century.
Yeah.
If a nation has a strong rule of law and political independence, but its electricity, its healthcare budget, and its economic lifeblood are entirely tethered to foreign aid and imported oil, how truly independent is it?
That is a profound question.
The true goal of the sustainable transition outlined in this presentation isn't just economic growth. It is the pursuit of genuine functional sovereignty.
That is incredibly powerful. We wish you the absolute best of luck with your presentation. We are confident that you now know the deep story behind every single data point and design choice. Go out there and make them see the bones beneath the X-ray.